This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopian troops march onto Tigray capital. Dozens killed in eastern DRC in latest attacks blamed on ADF. And BRICS countries release Moscow declaration reaffirming multilateralism. Hello everyone, welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In your business news, the World Bank delegation arrives in Cairo to review economic policies. And in sports, Tunisia's men's volleyball team back in training as they prepare for Tokyo 2020 qualifiers. We start off with the latest on the conflict in Ethiopia's Etigre region. The government says the military has conquered most of northern Tigray and is now set to capture Mekelle, the regional capital. Meanwhile, Tigrayan forces said they were resisting in Alamata, a town in the south of the region. A Facebook post by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the final critical act of law enforcement will be done in the coming days, end quote. This comes after the expiry of a 3-day deadline set by the government for Tigrayan forces to surrender. Tigray's ruling party, the TPLF, accused the government armed forces of attacking people and destroying major facilities. The federal government has denied the attacks on civilians. Well, CGTN's Girum Chala is now joining us with the latest on the fighting in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Girum, Ethiopia says its troops are marching onto Mekelle following the expiry of a 3-day deadline for TPLF forces to surrender. What is the latest on that front?
Well, Beatrice, as you've said, the 72 hours deadline for Tigray Special Forces and other loyal forces inside that regional state to surrender their arms and also rejoin the National Defense Forces has expired about a night and so ago. And now the conflict in the north has taken yet another turn, this time around the National Defense Force being ordered to take whatever necessary measure to subdue the force in the north and also disarm them as soon as possible. What we are hearing from the north front is that the western and eastern parts of the Tigray regional state are now in the hands of the National Defense Force. So many places are also continuing to fall under their arms. Airstrikes are continuing, including the capital city of Tigray regional state, Mekelle, is facing repeated attacks by the National Defense Force themselves. We have also heard of complaints by the defense communications people that the Tigray regional state force are blocking roads and destroying infrastructures, including bridges, so that the force cannot travel and attack them on the other side. But in general terms, what we really know is that the National Defense Force are now expedited the efforts of attacking the northern fronts, and they are gaining so many victories at the moment, as we know.
Girum, we do know that former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo has arrived in the capital, Addis Ababa, to try and mediate that conflict. What can you tell us about this meeting?
Well, first of all, Beatrice, the call for dialogue comes from different directions. The United Nations, just to mention, the African Union, government of Kenya, government of Uganda, neighboring states such as also Djibouti and Sudan are asking the two parties, the central government here in Addis Ababa and the Tigray regional state, to sit down for dialogue and revert from conflict to peaceful resolution. However, and also, as you've said, a former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, is reportedly here in Addis Ababa trying to find the same solution, peaceful solution for the ongoing conflict. The Ethiopian government stance remains to be one and strong. That is, there is no room for discussions at this time around. The spokesperson of the state of emergency, Redouane Hussein, who is also the state minister of foreign affairs, also the prime minister himself, repeatedly said the effort of trying to find peaceful solutions has been made so
Girum Chala joining us there from Addis Ababa with that latest on the attack in Ethiopia. Well, let's now shift our focus to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where over 36 people have been killed in North Kivu province in the eastern part of the country. Local officials say the bodies were found in Virunga National Park after being executed. Officials claim the deaths are linked to the Allied Democratic Forces, a militia group accused of killing hundreds of civilians in the Democratic Republic of Congo over the past year. The ADF has been active in the region since the 1990s. It is one of more than 100 militias in the DRC's eastern provinces. According to UN figures, more than 1,000 civilians have been killed by the ADF between 2019 and 2020. Let's cross over to CGTN's Chris Ochamringa for more on the killings in the DRC. Chris, what is the latest on that attack in DR Congo's town of Beni?
Well, the Congolese army, Beatrice, says that 6 people were killed in the eastern DRC yesterday, and another 29 people were killed in Virunga National Park. And so they have condemned these attacks. The UN peacekeeping mission, MONUSCO, and the Congolese government said they're going to step up the fight against these rebels who have killed very many people since the government launched a military offensive against them in October last year. The UN estimates that there are more than 1,000 people who have been killed, and so everyone, the locals there are calling for the government to protect them because they are fed up of these killings that have been happening in the region. Beatrice?
Chris, so why is this attack being blamed on the Ugandan rebel group Allied Democratic Forces?
Well, according to the deputy governor of North Kivu province, they're saying the initial findings suggest that this was the handiwork of the Allied Democratic Forces. They carried out some interviews with some of the survivors of these attacks, and the people were telling them how the attack was carried out, the kind of weapons that these people used, and that is how they concluded that this must have been done by the Allied Democratic Forces. You know, over the years, the authorities there have noticed a pattern that is carried out by the ADF to kill civilians in that area. They use crude tools like knives, machetes, axes, and they also kill people with guns. They burn houses, and so this latest attack was similar to what has been carried out in the area. The ADF is the most formidable rebel group in the area, and they have been carrying out attacks in that region, and so that, you know, gave the authorities reason to believe that it was carried out by them. But we haven't had any claim of responsibility by the Allied Democratic Forces, so for now it's just a suspicion.
Right, Chris, but there is some positive news coming out over the DRC today. Authorities in the DRC are expected to declare the Ebola outbreak in the northwest over after nearly 6 months and 55 deaths. What more can you tell us about this news?
Well, Beatrice, the government in the DRC has declared the Ebola outbreak over. This is the 11th outbreak that happened in Equator province in the northwest of the DRC. It's a dense rainforest. They had very many challenges of taking the vaccines and the other treatments because of logistical problems. That area has very many poor roads, so they had to travel across the rivers. And the government, you know, was facing it very rough because this outbreak happened as the previous outbreak, the 10th Ebola outbreak in the DRC, was still on. And also the COVID-19 pandemic happened. So the government didn't have enough money to contain this outbreak. So they relied a lot on the support of the international community, who they gave a lot of thanks for the support in ending this outbreak. The Minister of Health also thanked the health workers and all the community members who cooperated with them to ensure that this outbreak was brought to an end. They have been strengthening their surveillance system to ensure that if any other Ebola outbreak occurs in that region, they can quickly detect it, isolate the individual so that the disease does not spread. They've also urged the people in that area. Like I mentioned earlier, that area is a dense rainforest, and the Congolese people in that area love eating bush meat, what they call nyama ya zamba in Lingala. And so the scientists have, you know, found a link between these animals like bats and monkeys to spread the Ebola virus. So the authorities have warned them against eating the wild animals. They've urged them to find alternative sources of food so that they can stop this outbreak from happening again in the region.
All right, Chris Ochamringo joining us there from Kinshasa in the DRC. The 5 BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, say they stay committed to a multilateral approach to global issues. They have released the Moscow Declaration. Li Jingyi has more.
Russia was the chair of this year's talks, which took place virtually. In the Moscow Declaration, a key topic was the commitment to multilateralism. The BRICS members say they seek to establish a more fair, equitable, and representative multipolar international system. The declaration has called the international community to uphold sovereign equality of all states and respect each country's territorial integrity and mutual respect for interests and concerns of all. The countries reaffirmed the principles of non-intervention in the internal affairs of states and called the international community to follow international law and the UN Charter. The countries also pledged to work closer together to combat terrorism, aiming to make a meaningful contribution to the global efforts in the area. Chinese President Xi Jinping made proposals for reviving the world economy in a keynote speech.
China will work with other parties to flesh out the BRICS partnership on new industrial revolution at a faster pace. We will open in Xiamen, Fujian province, a BRICS partnership on new industrial revolution innovation center, and we welcome the active participation of fellow BRICS countries.
Xi also briefed the other leaders on China's development blueprint and pledged to help achieve a global recovery.
We will redouble efforts to expand domestic demand, deepen reform across the board, and promote innovation in science and technology to add impetus to China's economic growth. China will not shut its door of opening up. It will embrace the world with more open arms. China will be more vigorous in integrating with the global market and will take greater initiative in deepening international cooperation. In so doing, China will create more opportunities and space for global recovery and growth.
President Xi also called for better coordination of macroeconomic policies, safer and more open supply chains, and more cooperation for scientific and technological innovation. BRICS members also said they are willing to further cooperate in fighting the pandemic, as well as in politics and cultural exchanges. Li Jingyi, CGTN.
The leaders also say they believe collaborations like BRICS are very valuable and must continue. Stuart Smith reports.
Well, one of the biggest discussion points was this idea that multilateralism is important, and the work that BRICS countries do is more important than ever, especially in tackling global issues like the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 100 recommendations were made at the summit declaration, and over 30 separate documents were signed off. And one of those documents was particularly important, if not the most important. It was the sustainable economic strategy for the BRICS countries for the next 5 years. And this dealt with issues like increasing trade, increasing investment, and the development of a new digital economy.
Given the pandemic, each of our countries this year faced the need to take urgent steps to support national industry, finance and the social sphere, to restore their economies, to return them to the trajectory of sustainable growth.
And on top of that, a new economic strategy. Of course, it was the COVID-19 pandemic that was also leading discussions, and there was a lot of talk about how the BRICS countries could be influential in the development of a vaccine.
The current experience demonstrates the need to accelerate the establishment of the BRICS Vaccine Research and Development Center in South Africa as agreed in the 2018 Johannesburg Declaration.
And many of these countries have other methods to try and help develop a vaccine, including on a bilateral basis, so not necessarily BRICS-led, but Russia, India and China are all developing their own research centres while this BRICS Vaccine Research Centre gets set up. Well, a big byword which came up from many leaders was the word reform, not reform of the BRICS institutions, but reform of other institutions.
भारत का मानना है कि UN Security Council
India believes that reforms in the UN Security Council are very important. We hope for support from our BRICS partners on this issue. Within the UN, there are many organizations that are not working in accordance to current realities.
To have an international community that is truly integrated and active, we have to reform the international entities, for example, the WHO and WTO.
It will be up to the BRICS councils and committees to implement these decisions made yesterday over the next year. And no doubt the 5 leaders will be bringing up these topics of multilateralism and of reform at the G20 summit, which is being hosted by Saudi Arabia at the weekend.
Chinese President Xi Jinping's virtual speech at the 12th BRICS summit in Beijing has been closely followed in South Africa. The House chairperson of South Africa's National Assembly, Cedric Frolik, says that all countries in the world have their own advantages in certain areas. He advised nations to adapt to multilateralism as they are all interconnected. Frolik also commended China for its new energy technologies, which have enhanced green development. Let's take a listen.
We can see the remarkable progress in terms of the new technologies that has been created in terms of the green environment approach of the leadership of China. And what this has done is that it's not only beneficial to the people of China, because around the world now, you can see new technologies being rolled out, whether it's in terms of the solar power, wind energy, as well as a number of other innovative measures that has been put in place to reduce carbon emissions in China and the impact that it has on the world.
At least 5 people have died and 8 others wounded in Somalia after a suicide bomber blew himself up in a restaurant. The incident is said to have occurred near a police base in the country's capital, Mogadishu. It is unclear who was behind the attack. Police forces suspect the Al-Qaeda-allied Islamist group Al-Shabaab. The group frequently carries out bombings in Mogadishu and elsewhere in the Horn of Africa nation as part of its campaign to topple the central government.
The suicide bomber detonated at a tea shop in Hamar Jajab district near the police academy. He managed to kill 5 people and wounded 8 others, and police are at the scene helping the wounded and investigating.
And staying in Somalia, U.S. President Donald Trump may withdraw nearly all U.S. troops from Somalia as part of a global pullback that could see major reductions in Afghanistan and a slight drawdown in Iraq. President Trump is expected to settle for a partial withdrawal from Afghanistan, despite promising to pull out all troops by Christmas. He's also expected to order a small drawdown in Iraq from 3,000 to 2,500. The United States has about 700 troops in Somalia. The U.S. troops are focused on helping local forces defeat the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab insurgency. We can now cross over to CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello, who's joining us from Mogadishu with more. Abdulaziz, President Trump may withdraw troops from Somalia as part of a global pullback. How significant would such a move be on Somalia, particularly since we still know that there are reports of attacks?
Well, Beatrice, including the Somali president, most recently urged the United States government against any hasty pullout of U.S. troops in Somalia. So that comes from the Somali president who last month, actually in October, urged the U.S. president not to withdraw his troops in Somalia, claiming that they are making gains and assisting the Somali forces as well as the African Union troops in battling the Africa's most dreaded militant group, Al-Shabaab, that is also an Al-Qaeda affiliate. So technically what has happened in Somalia since 2017 after President Farmajo took over leadership and President Trump took over leadership in the U.S. Actually, the United States military has been doing a lot of work here in Somalia. There's been an increase in the number of drone strikes in Somalia that has played an important role in weakening Al-Shabaab might here in Somalia. So the Somali government is of the view that any hasty pullout right now will deal a huge blow to the years of efforts in counterterrorism that both the United States, Somalia, as well as its African Union partners have done in Somalia. So Mogadishu is of the view that any hasty pullout right now is dangerous to its efforts of securing the country, because in recent years, Somali troops, most of them who are backed by U.S. military advisors, 700 in number, have actually made inroads into Al-Shabaab strongholds, especially in Lower Shabelle region that has been for years considered the epicenter of the conflict here in southern Somalia, and it's a place where most of Al-Shabaab leadership and all the major attacks are carried out, and they're brought to Mogadishu. So Mogadishu is of the view right now that any hasty pullout by Washington will deal a huge blow to all the years and the sacrifice that has been made by the Somali forces, AMISOM, as well as its U.S. partners.
So you talk of some inroads having been made in the Lower Shabelle region particularly, but just give us a clear understanding of what exactly has been the impact of U.S. troops themselves in Somalia, and is the country ready for U.S. troops pullback?
Well, especially in the country, the United States has a military base that is, it belongs to the Somalis actually, but most of the staff and the soldiers there are US trained. It's called DANAB. DANAB is an elite unit of the Somali National Army that is trained and mentored, as well as it's paid also by the United States military. So it has proved very vital in clandestine operations in targeting Al-Shabaab area. So U.S. military advisors have been working with DANAB, this elite military unit, in carrying out raids in Al-Shabaab strongholds without the Al-Shabaab knowing of these attacks happening. So most of these attacks are done at night. Most of them are drone strikes. Others are helicopter raids on Al-Shabaab targets, and then the Al-Shabaab leadership are either neutralized or they're either brought to justice or brought to Mogadishu to face a trial. So this elite unit will be affected if the U.S. decides to pull out right now, as well as the number of incidents that have been happening in Mogadishu have drastically reduced, and all across the country. Basically, the pressure that has been exerted by the U.S. drone strikes has allowed Mogadishu, AMISOM and Somali forces to turn the tide against Al-Shabaab. Before, in 2017, random attacks used to happen in Mogadishu. Every other week there used to be a major attack, but now things have improved. The country has become more secure. So any hasty pullout of U.S. troops right now is going to deal a huge blow to the years of efforts that have been made, especially in counterterrorism. And another point also to note is that Al-Shabaab has weakened, power has been weakened, because before they used to carry out attacks on Somali bases, but now we've seen them cross the border, launch attacks in Kenya, especially at the U.S. base in Manda Bay in early January. So any pullout of the U.S. troops in Somalia will give Al-Shabaab enough strength to carry out more attacks in Somalia and beyond.
Abdulaziz Bello joining us with an update from Mogadishu. Thank you. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. The United Nations is concerned over a delay in the 2018 South Sudan peace deal implementation. And South Africa's former president Jacob Zuma to testify against corruption allegations.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The The UN mission in South Sudan is calling on parties to expedite the implementation of the 2018 peace deal. The formation of a unity government began in February to end more than 5 years of civil war. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
Formation of the unity government in South Sudan began 9 months ago. However, there is still only the executive arm of the government. The former rival armed forces have been unified and retrained, but are not yet redeployed. The United Nations mission in South Sudan says it is concerned over the delay in the peace deal's implementation.
But a priority for us, and I'm sure for everybody, is the urgent need to breathe fresh life into the peace process, which is currently stalled. We need to see action on several fronts so that the election can take place at the end of the transitional period, as promised to the citizens of this country.
South Sudan's 2018 peace deal provides that elections be held 2 months before the end of the transitional period in 2023. The peace deal also dictates that the Political Parties Act be amended by Parliament within 6 months of the formation of the new government. That's to allow political parties prepare for elections, but the amendment has not been done yet because Parliament is not yet reconstituted. The Electoral Commission is also not yet in place. At the state level, President Salva Kiir has appointed 9 out of the 10 governors, but he has refused to appoint a state governor nominated by opposition leader and Vice President Riek Machar. Now, Riek Machar's group, known as SPLM-AIO, says it will not cooperate further in any appointment of officials. The peace deal gives control of Upper Nile State to Machar's camp.
The list is from the SPLM-IO for the formation of the state government are ready, and we shall submit them as soon as the governor of Upper Nile State is appointed.
The Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD, which mediated South Sudan's 2018 peace deal, says it remains hopeful that the peace process will end violence in the country.
Very slow, but holding gradually. So we have almost completed most of the agreements signed over here, except we are remaining with few important issues to be handled, like the formation of the new parliament, the new constitution.
IGAD further says it is working to ensure that the armed groups not included in the 2018 agreement join the peace process. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The Zondo Commission investigating state capture was meant to hear testimony from former President Jacob Zuma. This was in response to 34 witnesses who implicated Zuma in corruption allegations. Angelo Coppola has the details.
Before Zuma could begin to give evidence, the Deputy Chief Justice had to hear an application from Zuma's lawyers to have the Commission head Raymond Zondo recuse himself.
I believe that President Zuma is the victim of selective justice, of biasness, and that he's being targeted for political purposes rather than for purposes of justice.
Mr. Zuma has been to the Commission before to give evidence. His next appearance was postponed due to medical issues.
And so it's not true that there has been refusal. Up to now, I can tell this Commission, as I make these bold suggestions, Chair, about how you've run this Commission and things you've said, that Mr. Zuma, up to 10 minutes ago, still tells me he believes that this Commission at some point must hear his version.
The stakes are high, and Zuma's legal team made no bones about the approach that they would take.
If you force me to bring him here, without the climate being created for him to believe that he's not being charged, well, I'll put him there, Chair, and he'll exercise his rights to say nothing.
It's day one of 4 days of scheduled appearance by Mr. Zuma, and today was spent hearing arguments for and against recusal of the Deputy Chief Justice. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get to the nub of the case. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Nigeria's university year ends in December, meaning many students are close to an entire academic year effectively being written off because of a strike action. Industrial action from some universities staff has already lasted over 8 months, and there is no end in sight. The walkout by the Academic Staff Union of Universities is partly over a payment platform. The federal government says all public workers, including university lecturers, must subscribe to or else forfeit their wages. Correspondent Phil Ihaza tells us more from Abuja, Nigeria's capital.
Purity Akaka is studying public administration at Nasarawa State University. But she said she's had to come here to learn a skill because public universities in Nigeria have been on strike since March.
I've been at home for over 8 months now because of the lecturers' strike. And so I decided to acquire skills because I don't know when they're even planning on coming back, and I can't just stay without learning anything. So I decided to come and learn how to sew, to be more resourceful.
This prolonged strike by ASU hinges on funding for universities and a new payment platform imposed by the government on all civil servants. It's called Integrated Payroll and Personal Information System, or IPPIS. According to the government, the platform is meant to check fraud and the payment of unauthorized or multiple allowances. But lecturers say it doesn't address the peculiarities of the university system in Nigeria that allows them work and earn in more than one university at a time.
It will lead to issues such as the universities not being able to recruit lecturers who have perhaps international experience or certain expertise. And then, of course, because we have shortfalls across universities in the country, manpower shortfalls. Now, those universities that have such shortfalls will not be able to recruit academics that can show up, that can fill up that gap in their manpower.
The government disagrees.
Workers or employees do not dictate to their employers how they will be paid their emoluments. The only thing there is that your emoluments should be paid as and when due.
ASU has presented an alternative payroll system to the government, which it says captures both the concerns of the government as well as the lecturers.
But it's been 8 months now, and negotiations between the two parties have continued to stall. The lingering strike action has altered plans and projections of millions of students from about 90 public universities across Nigeria.
I feel they should just come together to a round table and then come to a logical conclusion on what to do with all of this, because we can't just waste a whole 1 year calendar without doing anything.
And that echoes the concerns of many students who fear having to stitch together a new career path with their further education on hold. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
And your business news is coming up next. Here's what we have for you. A World Bank delegation arrives in Cairo to review economic policies. And Tanzania's president pledges to focus on economy and attracting investors.
It's taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
A World Bank delegation is in Cairo to review Egypt's economic policy amid the slowdown caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The North African state has largely withstood the COVID-19 shock, but serious challenges still remain and could limit long-term growth. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more details.
The World Bank report has commended Egypt's economic and fiscal policies during the pandemic. The North African state has succeeded in keeping growth at over 2.5%, while most of the countries in the region have witnessed major contractions. The report, however, says there are two main issues that need to be addressed by Cairo in order to maintain the success going forward. First is stimulating private sector activity. A sluggish private sector means low tax revenues, low foreign direct investments, and weak exports for manufacturing and non-petroleum industries.
The Ministry of Industry is undergoing several programs and changes to ease the process of establishing factories, cut on bureaucracy and red tape, and facilitate regulations. Foreign investments are currently $9 billion. The government wants to increase that amount through diversification. Among other tools, it has lately tapped into green bonds for the first time to attract investors in green and renewable energy.
Higher private sector activity would solve the second shortcoming addressed in the report, which is job creation.
The World Bank delegation is working with the government to study how to support the SME sector, which is the backbone of the economy, as well as employment. The plans are aimed at expanding the sector further, even if the coronavirus pandemic remains for the long term.
The government is also working on upgrading the skills of the labor force. Training is essential, especially on technology use, to be able to produce higher quality employment opportunities. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's now turn to Tanzania, where the newly re-elected President John Magufuli has laid out his priorities for the next 5 years. Among other things, he has pledged to focus on the transformation of key parts of the economy while removing hurdles facing investors who want to deploy capital in the East African country. CGTN's Isaac Lukando has the details.
President John Magufuli is in Parliament to lay out his plans for the next 5 years. Big on his agenda is growing the country's economy. He says achieving his goal will require the efforts of all Tanzanians.
We need to have many Tanzanian billionaires, including parliamentarians. I want all Tanzanians to fully take part in building their country.
The president wants to see economic growth of 8% annually and 8 million jobs created over the next 5 years. He also wants to see increased domestic and foreign investment in the country's industries. To this end, the president is offering tax cuts and improvement of the country's investment climate.
There has been a lot of bureaucracy and hassle for investors and a lot of time wasting, causing them to lose hope. I want an investor with funds to get the necessary permits within 14 days.
The 2020 Doing Business report indicates that Tanzania has climbed 2 positions to the 141st position globally. But the country still lags behind its East African neighbors, Rwanda and Kenya. According to the United Nations 2020 World Investment Report, foreign direct investment in Tanzania reached $1.1 billion in 2019, about a 5% increase from the previous year. President Magufuli hopes that attracting more investment will not only translate into the economic growth he desires, but also into better lives for ordinary Tanzanians. Business people in the country are generally optimistic about the government's plans, but say it must address their challenges.
Most business people had the ability to travel abroad on their own to buy merchandise, but things have become difficult since the coronavirus hit, so we have to use proxies to order things, and so it is really affecting us.
If the government helps us get those investors with deep pockets, I think I can go far and reach where the president was talking about, having many billionaires. I can be among them.
I can be among them.
The road ahead for President Magufuli may not be an easy one. The World Bank projects growth of 4% this year from the previous 7% due to the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Just how well the country navigates these hurdles to improve Tanzanian lives remains to be seen. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Trade experts in Uganda are worried that the recent trade agreement between Kenya and the United Kingdom is sending the wrong signals in the East African Community bloc. Earlier this month, Kenya and the UK finalized negotiations on a trade deal that will provide for companies operating in Kenya, including British businesses, to benefit from duty-free access as they export products to the UK. However, the agreement could affect future cooperation among the East African Community states. CGTN's Michael Baleke has the details.
The new deal will see Kenya export products such as cut flowers, vegetables, coffee and tea, while the UK will have free access to import vehicles, pharmaceuticals and paper worth almost $1 billion. But trade experts argue the trade deal may affect the relationship of countries within the East African trade bloc.
There are areas as a region where we are yet to fully agree. Areas like investment, areas like services, areas like electronic commerce, digital trade, which Kenya has now moved on to agree into the FTA with the UK.
Kenya is part of the EAC trade grouping, which includes Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, Burundi and South Sudan. The countries had agreed to negotiate as a bloc in 2021 because of the election period in Uganda and Tanzania. But trade experts believe the push by Kenya to secure its own pact with the UK could undermine the process and also affect the free movement of goods between Kenya and her EAC partners.
Our partner states have weak capacity to verify the originality of Kenyan exports to other partner states. And it has been the case, by the way, so far, when Kenya entered into a rice agreement with Pakistan.
The UK deal with Kenya could also push existing trade tensions in the EAC over the edge. Kenya has recently been blocking Uganda's sugarcane, poultry and dairy products from entering its market. The UK-Kenya deal is a translation of the terms previously agreed between the European Union and the East African Community and includes sections which allow other East African Community states to join in the future. Uganda's export promoters believe a deal between UK and Kenya sets the pace and gives an added advantage to other EAC member states during the 2021 negotiations.
What will Britain gain by giving an unfair advantage, by giving lesser market access benefits to these African countries than they have been getting from the EU bloc? And please remember, the EU bloc is still available as a big market for African countries. For Uganda's case, the EU bloc is the market for current market of more than $500 million.
In under 2 years, the UK government has signed or agreed in principle trade agreements with 52 countries. However, Kenya still has up to the end of the year to ratify its agreement with the UK. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Flights between Tunisia and Libya have resumed after being halted for 8 months following the outbreak of the novel coronavirus. It comes a few weeks after the two North African neighbors agreed to reopen their land and air borders with strict health protocols. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chauchi with more on this report.
The Tunis Carthage Airport Authority has put in place a strict health protocol as it receives more travelers transiting through Tunisia's main airport. All Tunisian and Libyan travelers must comply with the new safety measures.
We've decided to resume air traffic between Tunisia and Libya because this is a normal situation between two brotherly countries. I wish stability for our Libyan brothers. I hope they will reach an inter-Libya political settlement.
The Ras Asjir border crossing between Tunisia and Libya also reopened for travelers in both directions after a closure of 8 months. Prime Minister Hisham Meshishi declared all measures have been taken to restore life at the border crossings, which had experienced weeks of blockades. He added that economic activities were negatively affected during the pandemic.
Tunisia and Libya are one people in two countries, and such border crossing closure for 8 months cannot return or continue, considering the human, historical, and economic relationship between the two countries. We want to limit the impact of this health crisis and its negative effects on economic life. We have prepared with the Libyan side a health protocol that guarantees the safe travel of Tunisians and Libyans.
Experts believe the resumption of flights will boost the economy in the two North African countries. Authorities are optimistic the exchange of goods and services is expected to peak in the next 2 months.
Exporting local products to the Libyan market is vital to hundreds of Tunisian companies. Tens of thousands of Tunisians work in Libya in different economic sectors. Opening that border and resuming flights will benefit businesses on both sides, especially in border regions, which depend on trade between Tunisia and Libya.
Tunisia announced on March 17th that it closed airports for inbound flights to curb the virus outbreak. It partially resumed flights to Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Canada on June 27th. After several weeks of negotiation, Tunisia and Libya have reached an agreement on a joint health protocol to combat COVID-19. The agreement includes several measures applicable to Tunisian and Libyan nationals during their travel between the two North African countries. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Tunisia men's volleyball team back in training as they prepare for the Tokyo 2020 qualifiers.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find